Welcome to Commending and Contending, a podcast of the Gospel Coalition Australia. I'm your host, Jonathan Holt. The Gospel Coalition Australia exists to encourage and assist Australian Christians to remain convinced of the truth and power of the gospel, to commend and contend for the gospel in our lives and ministries, and to foster connection between individuals, churches, and other ministries so that we can most effectively advance the gospel in Australia. Joining me today is Council Member Gary Millar. Welcome, Gary.
Hi, Jonathan. Thanks for having me on.
Now, Gary, for those of us maybe who haven't had the chance to meet you and get to know you as I have on the council, can you just introduce yourself for us?
I'm Gary Millar, as you can tell from my accent. I'm from Northern Ireland, born just outside Belfast. Before moving to Australia in 2012, I was a pastor for 17 years in Ireland, both North and South. We spent 12 years in Dublin. And since 2012, I've been the principal of Queensland Theological College. My wife Fiona and I have been married for 31 years. She's Scottish, born of missionary parents in Peru. And we've three daughters, one in Canberra, two home in Brisbane, one at uni, and one just finishing school.
And how has God been encouraging you recently?
Oh, it's very, very encouraged over the last week. We had an old friend from Ireland out of the blue email us to come asking if she could stay with us for a few days. Her younger sister, who actually used to be in our youth group in Ireland, plays football for the Republic of Ireland, so was playing in the World Cup. And Judith was following her little sister. But it was particularly encouraging because Judith became a Christian on Good Friday. I think it was in 2003, as a result of what I'm fairly convinced was one of the worst talks ever given in the history of Christendom. By me, obviously. Good Friday's quite hard to muck up, but believe me, I managed. I don't know if you've ever had the sense, but I was listening to myself speak, thinking, I don't even know what I'm talking about. This is muddled, and I'm not. I mean, those people who know me, they know I'm a fairly upbeat person. I don't get, I tend not to get down on myself. But honestly, I went home after that, and it was in the evening. That's that kind of convention in Ireland. And I went home and actually went to bed feeling royally sorry for myself. And then Judith phoned me out of the blue. It was about 9 o'clock at night, and she was in tears. And I remember thinking to myself, yeah, I think I'd be in tears if I just had to listen to that. and she said, I've just understood for the first time what it means for Jesus to die for me. and honestly, part of me wanted to say, no, after that, I don't think you do understand it. But mercifully, that she did. She was just one of those people, she'd been in church, but her life was transformed. She was different from that day on. And I think to meet someone then 20 years on, who's just a lovely Christian woman, growing, serving in a small local church in Dublin, clearly, as excited about living for Jesus as she was in those early days, and then to remember that God does this through his word. And it's just a beautiful reminder, I think, both of for me, of my weak. Judith is a perpetual reminder of my weakness and the way in which God works through his word. And, I don't know, my experience is I need to be reminded of that. That regularly, of those days when God does work dramatically. And then most of the time to be reminded, your part in this is not significant, Gary Millar. Just get on and get my word out there. So, yeah, so that was very encouraging, just being able to catch up with an old friend like that.
When we're contending for the gospel as Christian leaders, we can often be outward focused in the way that we need to maybe contend in the community or contend amongst our church. But as leaders, we probably also need to contend for the place the gospel has in our own hearts and in our own lives. You're working in a place where Christian leaders are being produced. How does contending for the gospel take place in the heart of the leader?
Yeah, I think that's a vital question. I mean, and it's one, in the slightly strange world that I live in a theological college that's just in front of us all the time. Because I think, we obviously work hard, like many other colleges around Australia, we work hard to make sure that what we teach, that the actual content and the, if you like, the skills that we teach are adequate, are going to equip people for a lifetime of gospel ministry. We work hard at that. And I actually think in Australia, we're remarkably privileged, to have a whole bunch of colleges that take that very seriously. And I think we can say, relatively speaking, do it very well. We always do it better. But just being in a college and watching, kind of men and women, day after day after day, watching people, being equipped, but actually seeing them up close and then thinking, oh, hold on, there's something that we cannot do for them.
Yeah.
We can begin, we can play our part. I mean, obviously their local church plays the part, but actually the bit that we can't fix for them, if you like, I mean, at one level we can't do anything, but the bit we can't fix for them is actually kind of walking humbly with Christ for the rest of their lives. That's the bit we're aiming for. And I think the problem is that is a slow, long-term, kind of no shortcut process. And I do wonder, I think there's something in the water just now, or perhaps there always is, I'm not sure, but there's something in the water just now that we're thinking very hard and rightly thinking hard about how we do church, how we reach the world, how we maximize outcomes, how we actually see gospel fruit through the life of the church. And, amen to that. We've got to do all that. I think the problem is that for many of us, if you give us something to do that has instant results, we'll grab that. And I think there's an attendant danger. It's that if you do that well, you can actually quite quickly get sort of a reputation in your own circles. You can get respect. You can get people speaking encouragingly into your life. And if we're not very careful, we end up encouraging each other to focus on externals. And there's this hollow in the middle of the gospel worker. And I think, it's interesting because, I've had to sadly acknowledge the fact, that I am now, very definitely, in fact, middle-aged is sounding more and more attractive if people call me middle-aged. I'm 56 and I think I've been doing this for a long time. And one of the things I reflect on all the time is what are the things that I'm not saying that are going to damage the next generation? Because there are things that for me and kind of my peers, they're an absolute no-brainer. But the problem is that if I'm not very careful, I don't tell the people, I don't tell our students the things that are part of my DNA. So that my generation, it was kind of beaten into us that you read your Bible every day and pray. That if I don't do that, I mean, if I don't do that, I feel guilty. I'm not saying that's particularly gospel shit, but it is just a reality. And if I say to any of my mates, what is God saying to you? Like, don't give me the summary of the sermon you're preaching next Sunday. Like, what has God been teaching you today, yesterday? Like, we will talk about that, and everybody knows if you don't have an answer to that question, you should have. So you need to get your act together and start reading the Bible again. No, that's just, I don't talk about that. And partly I don't talk about that because, sometimes I think, oh, yeah, there was something a bit legalistic about the world that I grew up in. I don't want to impose that on the others. But the problem is, if I don't actually if I don't try to help students build, a gospel-shaped piety that will work every day, I'm doing it. I'm expecting them to do it, but nobody's telling them to do it. And in many cases, I think, where if I was at the tail end of the kind of legalism dominating things, I suspect lots of people, especially if your pastor's under 40, that's not going to be your issue. So there's a very unfortunate I'm not saying it because I'm recovering from legalism, and they're not saying it because, they've kind of slipped into perhaps an undemanding form of kind of cheap grace mentality. But either way, it doesn't work out for the people of God. And I think, part of where I came to this, the leadership failures in the last few years. And it wasn't so much, Mark Driscoll, was lived in a different universe to most of us. That wasn't, and even, Ravi Zacharias, I was aware of. I never met him. I think I read one of his books years ago. It didn't really have a lot of interaction. But there were a series of other people. Steve Timmis, who's kind of much more in my world and a couple of years older than me. And, I knew Steve and some other people around the world, and who are kind of much more normal. I was going, what's going on here? How can these people who I've listened to them teach the Bible, in some cases I've learned a lot from them, I've had conversations with them, and they weren't, it wasn't like, kind of Mars Hill craziness. There was nothing evidently wrong. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized, actually, with those guys, they were they were in a place where either they allowed themselves to stop doing some very basic things, or they were living in an environment where everybody else was saying, essentially, you're special. The normal rules don't apply to you. And so that then kind of sent me back to say, okay, how can I fulfill my responsibility at this point to do everything in my power to make sure that if any of the guys who go through college who are in ministry in Queensland or beyond in the next 20 years, whatever it is, that none of them are going to be able to say, oh yeah, nobody told us that actually you've got to contend for the gospel in your own heart. You've got to be committed to living out a gospel-shaped life yourself.
In some of the spaces in our life, like those moments of weakness, those moments where we kind of don't quite accomplish it, I can see how, we really want to cling to God in that area. But I think we struggle more with those kind of places where we're good at stuff and we're succeeding at stuff. And we do seem to have people around us telling us we're special and doing a great job and keep going. In the midst of success, how do we keep Christ and his gracious gospel in the forefront of our mind?
Yeah. Well, I think it is almost a cliche, but we do have to keep preaching the gospel to ourselves all the time. And I think you're right, because I think it's probably easier to do that when you're in a heap.
Yeah.
So look, I am weak, but you're strong. It is hard. I think somewhere it's Jonathan Edwards. I think it's in The Nature of True Virtue. I'm paraphrasing. He doesn't say it quite like this, but he basically says the problem is none of us are capable of a truly pure act. Because if we were ever to do one, we'd immediately pat ourselves in the back for having done it and so ruin it. And I think having a strong awareness of our own tendencies to take credit for things. And in a sense, I have to get out of bed every morning and go, I cannot do anything of any significance here. And for me, I know that we're all different, but my default tends to be, okay, I can fix this. It's like, with hard work, sound exegesis, and and hopefully people being suckered by an Irish accent, we might get through this. But I think that honestly, the waking up in the morning and reminding myself through the gospel that my security, satisfaction, significance, strength are in Christ, and apart from him I can do nothing. That's got to be the starting point.
What's a resource at the Gospel Coalition Australia website that you can recommend we have a look at, Gary?
One of the things I love about the website is there are where people are better positioned, who know more about stuff than I do, who are better positioned to think hard and help me then to think hard after them. Akos Spalak did a great article on AI just a few months ago, where he'd done a mountain of work, and I think kind of mapped out the ground really helpfully for us. And I do think, I mean, obviously it's an area in a college where it's a pressing matter, but I think all of us are going to have to think that through. And in that article, and there are you can name a whole trail of articles like this across the years where people have just done really good kind of digging for us and on issues where we're probably not going to have the time or even the expertise to go digging ourselves. So I think that's really valuable. And I think the other thing is, just for me, I mean, if I'm allowed to a generic thing, I think that one of the things I love about the way the website is developing is there's a broader range of people than ever. Lots of women, lots of younger people, pastors, like council members. It's just, I think for me, it's a window on how people who are not in my immediate world are thinking. I reckon I've got a fairly good handle on how theological college students in Brisbane are thinking. That's a fairly niche demographic, really. So I think actually, I know that's along with the specifics of the Akos's article, I think generally it just is massively helpful to me in thinking through what it means to be a Christian in Australia today. And I get lots of help from people who live in very different worlds and different social situations. And so I think that for me is the ongoing, just general stimulation to think through the challenges we face as the people of God.
Yeah, thanks. We'll put a link for that article in the show notes. Thanks so much for chatting with me today, Gary.
It's always a delight, John, even when we're being recorded.
This podcast is made by the Gospel Coalition Australia, and you can help us. You can share this episode, maybe with friends, folk at church, and you can help by going to our website and making a donation to grow the networks of Australian voices speaking the gospel to Australians.